everyone, and welcome to Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. This is episode 371. I'm James, joined by Ryan and Paul, and this week we're kicking off our annual season preview series. So today, in this episode, we'll be focusing on all things pitching. But first, the standard question as we convene for the first time in a week. How you guys been? Are you Oscar people? I'm not paying attention to this as it's going on, but Paul, how you been?
When you have children, you don't watch movies, especially
Right.
recent movies that you have to see in the theater. So and I'm not. It's cool. I like the Oscars. I like going to Oscar parties, but I don't have one to go to tonight, so not doing that. We've had a pretty active weekend. We went out for dinner on Friday night. Jeez, was that? And to a place called Carnivore and the Queen, which has been getting good reviews around here, which is where I sent you guys that picture that was hung up in their bathroom of a Pat Hughes autograph that I'm sure provided.
That was in the bathroom?
Yeah, provided scorecard from Game 7 of the Cubs World Series, which was pretty cool to see. So that was a good time. And then we went into the city today and did some city stuff. We went to a pop art fair in the Lincoln Square Ravenswood corridor along the railroad tracks on the north side. The Chicagoans will know where that is. That was cat themed. And this was driven, of course, by my wife, not me. I would go to a cat pop art event. We took the kids. It wasn't very fun. I would not recommend for next year. There were not enough real cats, and there were far too many people who are far too obsessed with cats. It did, however, have a bar, so not all was lost. So it was all right. Going into the city from the suburbs is a little bit of a commitment. It takes some time. Chicago is an hour away from all of its suburbs. It's one of the annoying things about Chicago. And so it's a trip. Kind of tired. Could stand going to bed, honestly. But that's okay. Pitching's fun, too.
Pitching for the next 90 minutes. We'll try to keep you awake. That's all good. We are not an artsy crowd here, I'm guessing, because I was telling Ryan, I'm not Oscars type either, and no offense to those who love the Oscars. I know JR and others, big Oscars people, whether it's the pageantry or you love the movies. Me and my wife are just not that crowd. Like we went to Nosferatu and we're bored out of our minds. I'm sure it was beautifully shot and cinematically perfect and all that stuff, but would not recommend it based on that. So yes, we are not Oscars people here either, Ryan.
Yeah, I tend to see a couple Oscar movies every year, like one or two. This year, I think the only one that I really saw that was getting buzz was the Bob Dylan one, which I liked. I thought it was, but I'm like a Bob Dylan obsessive, so that was,
right.
Yeah, whatever. But yeah, my wife was gone all weekend. She was off on a skiing trip, so I had cat duty. So I was like home taking care of the cat. The most exciting thing I did all weekend was go to get my ring that had been resized back from the jeweler. So that's the fun I've had all weekend. That was my great trek out of doors on Saturday, was to go out and get my ring that had been resized. So, yep, that's my weekend. So I'm, and there was no Liverpool this weekend, so that was sad. But since we last recorded, Liverpool has firmly established itself as the favorite for the Premier League, almost prohibitively. I think they might be getting close to paying out those bets. So that was awesome, but there was no game this weekend. So that, whatever. And then the Badgers today,
frustrating.
Yeah.
I didn't see, did they lose to State today?
Yeah, they
couldn't hit anything.
Yeah, they couldn't hit anything. And Michigan State was playing typical Michigan State bully ball. And it was a Big Ten road game in the classic awful, terrible sense. So it was just awful. Yeah.
On the bright side, Ryan, I know where you can get some cat art, so that's good.
My wife would probably find that somewhat interesting. I'd be interested to hear her mom. Yeah. Her mom hates modern art, so hates modern art. So that'd be kind of interesting. Actually, I think I'd enjoy going to it. Just to listen to her complain about it would be good. She really, in Minneapolis, their modern art museum, she really had opinions about that. Was not a fan. So,
interesting. I kind of like that one, actually.
I'm more of a classic art person. I took some art history classes, and so my frame of reference ends at about 1880. Anything past that is pretty much not stuff I would understand.
Gotcha.
I don't understand any of it. I'm a boring person, I've learned. So no interest, no artsiness, all of that. I do like to talk about the Brewers though. So at least I'm in the right spot for this. Let's talk pitching, but before we get started, a reminder for those of you who aren't patrons yet, you can become one at patreon.com/MKE tailgate. $2 a month guarantees you get your questions answered both on this podcast and on reporting as eligible. $5 gets you that priority plus the additional exclusive content, including the minor league extra with Ryan and Spencer, and Paul's reporting as eligible mini pods during Packers season. All right, let's start with the rotation. So obviously, Freddy Peralta will again be the opening day starter for the Brewers, and Pat Murphy did not engage in any of the usual spring training gamesmanship this year, making that fact pretty publicly known on, I think it was the first day of camp. Adam McKelvey always has the running bit where he asks the manager who's the opening day starter, and usually, it gets a groan from Craig Counsell or whoever, and Murph just said, it's Freddie. Who else would it be? So there you go.
Fair, I guess.
Right. Like, who else is it gonna be? We'll talk about some guys, but focusing on Freddie at this point, I think we kind of know what we're getting with him. He was inconsistent as at best last year as the lead starter, if you want to call him that. We saw his WARP drop from 4.1 in 2023 to just 2.4 last year, and he had a DRA of 4.39. So, Paul, every Freddie start is an up and down battle. What's the key to getting him back to that 2023 level, do you think, where he was a lot more consistent?
I think it's mostly just luck. I think one of the things that really gets you about Freddie is, I was thinking about this today while I was walking around a cat show, trying not to look at things. And a lot of teams have a lot, including the Brewers, have a lot of pitchers where you can be pretty sure they're going to give up like 3 to 5 runs. Like, that's kind of what they're going to do. If they're just going to give up that, and it's not going to be wildly out of that. And then there's a different class of pitcher, and Freddie is of that ilk. And one of the most frustrating kinds, where it's almost a sure thing he will not give up 3 to 5 runs. It's almost a sure thing he will give up either 0 or 1 runs, or like 7 runs. And if he gets to stay in long enough. And that can be awesome in certain circumstances, but it can also just be maddeningly frustrating because you want those good ones. And you put Freddie all together into one package, and he's not that much more valuable than like a consistent 4-run guy. But it kind of is what it is. I think one of the reasons that Freddie has gone down a little bit in terms of effectiveness on a per game basis is that when you boost his innings, you take away some of the leverage you have to get him in good situations sometimes, because he definitely he does have some tendency for splits. And I do think just because of his frame and stuff, he wears down a little bit. And I do kind of wonder if he is maybe better served not being the ace of his staff, if he is better served being a guy that you can maybe get a little bit more out of on a per game basis if you skip him every once in a while. But I just think there's luck in there too. I think Freddie just holding it together is just kind of a mental lucky thing that may or may not happen in any given season, and there's not much you can do about it. You just kind of got to ride or die and hope that you get good Freddie more than bad Freddie.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense to me. It is interesting because he's clearly sort of entering a different phase of his career here. He's 28 now, and he's not the pitcher that he used to be. He's not throwing the fastball nearly as much as he used to. And actually, his most effective pitch last year was the changeup.
Which is interesting. Yes.
Yeah, it's
going to go in
interesting.
K-Rod here. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's an interesting transformation going on there. I did find it interesting because if you had asked me, inning wise, what he had done the last couple of years, I mean, he's been up over 165 innings the last 2 years, 165 in 2023, 173 in 2024. That's up towards the top in the major leagues now. I mean, there aren't 250 inning guys anymore.
Nope.
So he's not that far off of being actually kind of an innings eater, what passes for an innings eater nowadays. So it's just interesting. I think he's making a career transition. I think we saw that last year. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here, because I think my long-standing fear about Freddy was that he was going to be a guy who aged relatively quickly and sort of, I've always thought that this contract, which runs through, well, the Brewers have another option year for 2026,
Yeah,
but
they do.
then he's, could be a free agent heading into his age 30 season in 2027. And I've always sort of thought that was probably going to be a good time to get out of the Freddy Peralta business. Like, that was, you were getting most of the good out of him during that time period. And so I'm curious to see what he can do for a second act. Like, I think he's a fairly reliable starter. Not an ace the way that the Brewers have, had aces in recent years, and in both Burns and Woodruff, but I think he's still a pretty damn good starter. And so I'm interested to see what this next act might look like, and how he's going to evolve as we go forward. Especially, because he, knock on wood, has been staying healthier than I think we maybe expected him to stay, if you were looking at some of those early years and some of the up and down that he went through that with health. So very curious to see what the next iteration here looks like.
Yeah, considering how he did start his career with a couple of injuries here or there, and his stature, I think a lot of us would have thought he would have broken down by now. But he's been that innings eater, and prospectus projecting him to lead the team in innings with 160 and a third innings this year, projecting him for a 3.89 ERA, 4.16 DRA as the 50th percentile projection, and tied for the team lead in WARP at 2.7. So again, not a frontline starter, so to speak. We can talk later about whether or not that's good enough for your game one starter in the postseason. Has not been to this point. But I think he is, surprisingly really reliable in the sense that he's going to pitch every fifth day. But yeah, to Paul's point, whether it's going to be 0 runs or 5 runs, totally up in the air, and the quality opponent doesn't seem to matter much either in that regard.
Yeah. Do you think this is it for him as a Brewer? With 1 year left, will the Brewers trade him, say, this offseason and try to cash in what remains of that value? Or are they going to maybe do what they did with Willy Adames and take it to the end, and then, make the, assuming everything is, going okay that way, make the qualifying offer and go that direction? I think I'm starting to lean towards that. I had been assuming a trade was likely coming, but I think the fact that he's taken on a more pronounced leadership role might make them say, nah, this is a guy we're willing to ride with to the end of next year, and then let him walk and take the pick in free agency. What do you guys think?
I kind of think that. I don't think they would say no to trading him. Like, if somebody knocked on the door and gave him something good, I don't think they would shut it. But I do think, the deal's been so good, it continues to be good through its end. Like, they like guys like Freddy in the rotation. And I also think that they will, maybe this is wrong, but he's pretty long-standing and will be extremely long-standing by the time this contract ends. And I think that they might keep him around just for familiar faces reasons too. So I would bet on, not confidently, but on that side too. I bet they let this run.
Yeah, but both of those being significantly more likely than any sort of additional extension, correct?
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think they pick up the option because they're going to need somebody to pitch in the rotation next year. We're going to talk about that probably in a bit. At least 3 pending free agents also in the rotation. So they're going to need 5 guys, and may as well keep Freddie around for the price that he's at. All right. If Freddie does falter, the Brewers now have another guy who has similarly shown flashes of all-star performances and also bounced back to being unreliable at times. That's Nestor Cortes. He's in the final year before free agency, as I mentioned. So this could be seen as somewhat of a rental in the Devin Williams trade, but there's also the possibility of some injury concerns after he missed much of the postseason last year before becoming part of course, an iconic highlight now in surrendering a game-winning grand slam to Freddie Freeman in Game 1 of the World Series. He is Brewersy in that he relies on changing speeds and deception more than pure stuff ratings, right? But I guess my big question for Nestor is, could he benefit from having the Brewers defense behind him? He seems like a prime candidate to me for that, Paul.
Yeah, I would agree with that generally. Actually, his savant profile surprised me a little bit just because his fastball value is pretty good,
Yeah.
which not to say that it's just necessarily overpowering. Um, but it is a very Brewersy profile in that there is some uh, maybe stuff's not the right, but trends there that you can work with. Like there is an ability to miss bats. There's an ability to not walk too many people, and there when it has all come together in the recent past, it's worked pretty well. It's just a matter of I think making that happen. Putting any pitcher in front of the Brewers defense is going to improve them. The weirdness of Miller Park that Jonathan has alluded to online a couple times this year also
Yeah.
the as of unsolved pitchers parkness of Miller Park will help everybody too. And I think he will probably play pretty well there. He's not old. He still throws pretty good. And like I totally get why the Brewers decided to go into the Nestor Cortes business. I'll bet he has a huge bounce back year this year and ends up looking pretty good.
Yeah, my big concern is the health and the fact
Yep.
that there was an elbow, and you just worry about that. It's just sort of like the sort of Damocles hanging over everything. You're just waiting. And
Yeah.
who knows, maybe he makes it through the full season and everything's fine, but you do wonder about it because when you start hearing about elbow stuff, obviously you start thinking of Tommy John and what can happen there. So, but yeah, he's an interesting guy. Fourth percentile ground ball rate in the big leagues. So lots and lots of fly balls.
Lots of fly balls.
Hey, the Brewers are equipped for that.
Yep,
The park isn't the
defense.
greatest for that, though. Obviously, so he had the advantage of pitching in Yankee Stadium. Obviously, he had the advantage of being a lefty, where lefty pitchers tend to do a lot better there because they have the big left field and the short porches in right. He'll have more of a straight up configuration here in Milwaukee, so that'll be kind of interesting to see. But yeah, it's an interesting thing that we talked about it when the Brewers made the trade for him, that this was a weird trade in that the Brewers did not get a large amount of control here.
Right.
Like they got the control in Durbin. More on him next week, but the 1 year of Nestor, I think, took everybody by surprise, but I think it also is an indicator of how much they value him and think he actually really can make an impact on this roster this year. I don't think they make that trade and do that deal and include him in that if they don't think Nestor can be really, really good this year. And also if they have to feel pretty good about his health as well, obviously. So maybe I should worry less about that, but yeah, this is an interesting thing because it's so different than a lot of what they've done, though, as both of you guys have pointed out. He is very Brewersy in terms of pitch mix and just sort of the overall thing that Nestor Cortes does in terms of getting outs. So, yeah, it's going to feel familiar and new all at once, I think, watching him. But you just got to keep your fingers crossed he stays healthy.
Yeah.
He is a lot of fun to watch if you haven't watched much of him before. Without runners on, he'll vary the delivery. He'll add that hesitation step in there just to throw guys off sometimes. It's pretty fun to watch, but he is also really good. So I think the more I look at the Devin Williams trade, it was more of a win now trade in a way, right? Like they were dealing from a position of depth. And they needed another starter in the Nestor Cortes mold, and were able to find that. It was really a perfect match for both sides. All right, Tobias Myers, huge revelation last year, but I think everybody still has some questions about how sustainable that performance was for a second year. He's one of the stars of the new Baseball Prospectus metrics that are looking more closely at pitcher arsenals and deception, perhaps providing some more confidence that he could be another above average starter this year, even if he isn't truly a low 3 ERA guy like he was last year. I guess, Paul, how confident are we in him heading into a full season now?
Pretty confident. I made fun of Tobias Myers a lot last year, early in the season, for basically being a warlock, and this is going to blow up at some point. It never blew up. Like, he just consistently was awesome throughout the entire season. I think he was their best pitcher last year, honestly.
Yeah.
Also very fun to watch. Good pitch mix. He was the only one I actually felt confident about every time out, I think, once other people started exploding in various ways, at least, for sure. And it's all smoke and mirrors, but and I get some sort of skepticism on Tobias Myers being super awesome next year too. Totally understand that. He's only projected for, I think, 1.8 WAR by Dakota, but I think the Brewers are sort of the best team at keeping smoke and mirrors pitchers working. Like Wade Miley, whenever he is on the team and healthy, he is good for the duration of his Brewer tenure. Yeah. This is what they're good at. If you are a guy who's allowing balls in play, which Tobias Myers is not always doing, they have the best defense behind you. As long as you have good command and control and deception, you can be awesome on this team. And so, while I think if you traded Tobias Myers away onto a less sophisticated organization, I think he would probably regress quite a bit, but he's not. He's here. So I don't think his DRA is as important as his ZRA is, frankly. And I think he'll probably be pretty good too. As long as you're on the Brewers near Tobias Myers, you're fine. As soon as you leave, that's when things maybe start to go south.
Yeah, he'll benefit greatly from the defense, which figures to be very good again. So he doesn't walk many people. This is a recurring theme. Freddie's, towards the high end of walks for this pitching staff. Nestor's not a guy who walks people. Tobias, not a guy who walks people. And really, when you walk as few, he had a 2.35 walks per 9 last year. And so even though his, 8.28 Ks per 9, that isn't great. That's obviously not, big time strikeout stuff in this day and age, but that differential is still pretty damn good. Like, there is when I love I see difference between my strikeout and my walk rates, and he's rocking, better than 3-1, approaching 4-1 in terms of strikeout to walk. You do love to see that. That is
Sheetsy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Sheets was striking guys out at a remarkable level for that era. Yeah. Yeah, he was striking out a ton of people, but the difference between how many he was striking out, though, and how many Myers is not actually that big anymore, but that's just because the game has completely changed since, when Ben Sheets was doing his thing. Being a 10 per 9 strikeout guy back then was, as a starter especially, was exceptional. So, but yeah.
And should mention really quick, because otherwise people will yell at me for forgetting. He had the best changeup in baseball last year. He had a changeup that was better than Devin Williams' Airbender. People hit .083. Sorry, that's not the splits. People batted .083 and slugged .083 against his changeup last year.
Single.
It's got to be one single, right? That's how that works. So that pitch is amazing. Whenever you have a pitch that is that good. Fastballs stand out. Seeing guys throw 100 with movement stand out, but changeups are as good as fastballs if they're effective, even though they can look very cool, honestly. But he is secretly a guy with an elite pitch, and that helps a lot too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good. We've already mentioned Freddie. You mentioned Tobias Myers, who I had written down here. There's another one coming up here in a minute. Brewers have a lot of changeups now, lots and lots of changeups. It seems to maybe be sort of emerging as their thing that they're doing. Though you do have to look out for some of those, because like Devin Williams' changeup wasn't a changeup. So, and Craig Yoho's changeup, not a changeup.
Screwball.
Yeah. So you gotta kind of adjust a little bit there, but these changeups are much more changeups than screwballs. These are not airbender pitches. These are So I'm very curious to see what he can do, but intrigued. And I definitely, we've mentioned on here before, the stuff about, I'm so glad that Baseball Prospectus came out with those metrics this winter, because it gave us a reason to look at him and go, oh, well, maybe there is something to this. Obviously,
right.
Yeah. I think if Myers goes out and puts up like a 3.8 ERA this year, it probably means he pitched about the same. He just got unluckier than he did last year, where he got, he had a really high strand rate last year, over 80%, which is real big. And just, a lot of things went his way last year that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But yeah, if he's putting up like a 3.75 ERA, he's probably about the same quality of pitcher he was last year when he put up a 3. But you just have to sort of assume some regression there because of, just changes of fortune.
Yeah, Prospectus is 50th percentile projection, 3.93 ERA in 116 innings. So that might explain why the WARP's a little bit lower at 1.8. They only project him for 116 innings, but he hits that 150 mark easily, probably one of the Brewers' best pitchers again. All right, so let's talk about a guy who probably doesn't have an elite pitch, but has a crap ton of them, and Aaron Civale.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a bit of a stopgap pickup last year, but Pacoda is actually projecting him as one of the Brewers' 3 best starters this year. He did pitch better for the Brewers than he did for the Rays, and is another pending free agent in the starting rotation. So I guess, Paul, what do you think a full season of Brewers pitching development does for a guy like him who doesn't do anything super well, but does a lot of things?
I don't understand Aaron Civale, and don't know how to project him. I actually, of every player on the Brewers, he is the one that I forget is on the Brewers most frequently.
Same.
And I think it is because he does have this weird repertoire of throwing all of these pitches, none of which are particularly good. There's, so nothing really stands out super great. And there's a couple that do, but they're small sample size, like that he doesn't throw very much. So I think, in theory, the pitching lab should love working with Aaron Civale, because you can just dive in and figure out, okay, do we want, like, slider seems to work pretty well. Maybe we can have him throw more than 38 of those this year. Although maybe that makes his arm explode. So who knows? But there's a lot to choose from here. And to the extent they do tunneling work, and to the extent they do minimize work, you should be able to get the most out of the guy. And so maybe that is, to some extent, what the systems are seeing in him. Because I don't honestly know how to project him very well. Like I said, I find him very forgettable. And usually with every other Brewers pitcher, like on their Savant chart at the top, something will stick out, positive or negative. Nope, he's pretty much just like bluish, grayish, up and down the whole thing. He has like the worst extension of any pitcher in baseball, which is a weird thing to have on the team. I feel like we often go after with huge extension, with big old arms and legs.
Kind of short arms it when he's throwing. Yeah.
It's a weird profile there. So I think he's a complete wild card. He'll probably be fine because he's often just fine, but there's probably some upside if they can maybe cut out some inefficient high volume pitches and make this all work together a little bit better. You can definitely throw too many pitches. Like, that's a thing that happens to guys. And it is not smart to throw bad pitches a significant amount of the time. There's definitely some of that in his profile that they can cut out.
Yeah, I don't know how much they're going to be tinkering. He's been with 2 really good organizations.
That's the other thing. Like, he's been with Brewers 2.0 already, 0.0 already. So
yeah,
what are you
Cleveland
going
and
to get
Tampa?
here?
Yeah. Like, which isn't to say that the Brewers can't tweak and find something new, and just sometimes different voices, different ideas. Who knows? A different pitch grip comes in, some little tweak. Pitchers are weird that way. It could all of a sudden just play well and all of that. But yeah, I think he is the most likely. What do they say on rates and barrels? He is oatmeal. Like, he is the definition. It's fine. It will.
Is that their spaghetti?
Yeah, well, it's just like, it'll fill you up. It's fine. It's just there. It's not going to hurt you, but it's not exciting. It's not something you get all happy about. So he's just sort of the definition of that, which, coming into this off season, he was kind of looking like there may be 2 or 3, depending on how what you thought of Tobias Myers. But now that they've added Nestor Cortes, and we've gotten some reassurance that maybe Tobias wasn't completely over his head last year, having him be like your number 4 starter, that feels totally fine. Like
it's what he is for his career.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
And if you can get 150 of that, last year pitched 161 innings, if you get 150 innings out of a fine Aaron Civale, he's not going to be the reason that the Brewers fall apart. Like he's not going to be to blame for that. Like you could be pretty sure that he's not going to cost them a bunch of wins. He might not gain them much, but he's not going to be costing them. So when he's your fourth best starter going into a season, it's fine.
The second highest projected WAR pitcher to not have any PECOTA comps.
That's weird. Yeah.
And the ones that are above him are Roki Sasaki and Shohei Ohtani. So like that's really weird, isn't it? Like that's bizarre. I'm going to ask Jonathan about that when I talk to him, but like why wouldn't he have the PECOTA comps? Surely someone is like him. That's very, very strange.
I think somebody was comp to him. I think I saw his name pop on somebody else's comps. So that'd be even weirder. I don't know. He's just the man in the blue and gold jersey. Like he doesn't stand out really in any way. Just look at him. He just looks anonymous and just
the next highest guy without PECOTA comps is Tomoyuki Sugano. So like it's Aaron Savale and then Asian players. That's it. Like that's interesting. After nobody else above a 1.0 WAR projection is missing PECOTA comps. Just the guys I just mentioned. So that's really, really weird that Aaron Savale does not have PECOTA comps.
He has no equal, I suppose.
Yeah.
He just stands alone there. I don't know. I enjoyed Adam McKelvey's note that Jeff Suppan was famous for only throwing fastballs in spring training, at least at the start of spring training. And then Aaron Savale's first start, he threw 7 different pitches, the complete opposite. So at least he's working on them all. So there's that to look forward to. All right. These are all guys we figured to be solid starters, but I think nobody on the Brewers pitching staff has the potential effect on the ceiling of this year's Brewers team, quite like Brandon Woodruff. We've all been very cautious about expectations for him this season as he still works his way back from that shoulder injury, but it's been so far so good in terms of how he's felt after pitching this spring. Hasn't pitched in any games, but no setbacks after live BP or anything like that. So I'm finding it really easy to slip into dreaming big if he's the Brandon Woodruff of old, still trying to hold on to tempering those expectations. This, of course, leads us to our first Patreon question this week from Postman, who's asking, what reasonable stat line would you consider to be a successful comeback for Brandon Woodruff this season? So I guess, Paul, is it just making it through the year, or what do you think?
I don't think I literally think that's true. If you get 110 innings from Brandon Woodruff, that's a great season, and it doesn't really matter what his stat line is because he pitched 110 innings. PECOTA projects him for 122. I don't think he'd go much over that in any situation. That seems high-ish, but like if he comes back and he starts every game that he's supposed to for the rest of the season, that means he was good enough to do it, and it means he was healthy enough to do it. So you're just looking at innings for him, honestly. That's it. Anything you get in terms of being good, like super good, like the best pitcher on the team, is gravy. It's really, I think, just about availability. If they actually have him out there and he's good enough to be in the rotation, that's a huge success.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would put a number on the ERA, though, and just, well, not a number, but basically say if he could be a league average or a little bit better in terms of run prevention, I think you have to be thrilled with that. If you're getting innings and league average run prevention out of him, obviously that is a far cry from Brandon Woodruff, who, truth be told, was better at run prevention than Corbin Burns was over his last few years with the Brewers. Like, he just was. In most of those years, at least. I think at post Corbin Burns winning the Cy Young in 2021, like, he was better at run prevention in general than but the question was being able to get the innings and all of that. So if you can get reasonably 100 innings of league average run prevention, I don't think any reasonable person could think that was not a success.
Yep.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that he was never really the most efficient with his pitches either. Lots of high pitch counts in early exits. And, if that's the case coming off a shoulder, it can be real hard to hit those inning projections. But also, if fingers crossed things go well, you're looking at somebody who's a huge difference maker and, really moves the needle, I think, for the team projection if he's even half as good as he was before. All right. I guess we should talk about the other options for the rotation, because the Brewers do have some depth there in the event that Woodruff or somebody else lands on the injured list. A handful of guys, whether it's DL Hall, whenever he eventually comes back from the strained lat at the start of camp, Aaron Ashby still out there if he can find a handle on his breaking stuff, which he has not been able to do so far this spring. There's also the offseason additions of Davy Garcia or Connor Thomas, and minor leaguers like Logan Henderson, Chad Patrick, or even a more under the radar guy like Casey Hunt. Also, don't forget Robert Gasser. Gasser is potentially coming back in the second half of the season. So I guess, Ryan, let's start with you on this one. Who are some of the guys who could possibly end up being rotation mainstays by the end of the year, even if they don't start the year in the rotation?
I'd like to say DL Hall, and not just because I traded for him in my dynasty league I care the most about. He was really a throw-in a trade to facilitate a slight move back. And that was fine. I would like to say DL Hall, but he's never stayed healthy, and so I have a hard time believing he's going to be able to be a rotation mainstay. You might get some starts out of him. I'm sure you're going to get starts out of him. But I still think his long-term future is probably in the bullpen. Ditto for Ashby, because we haven't ever seen him really be a successful starter. Even, before the shoulder stuff cropped up, we've never really seen that. And when he was popping last year as a really good pitcher, it was out of the bullpen. And yes, right. we were noting about how wild he has been, especially with the breaking pitches, and more on that later. But that has definitely been interesting. Davy Garcia has been intriguing this spring. I haven't actually gotten to see him pitch, but some of the outputs that we're getting on it are looking quite good. His numbers so far this spring, he has 4 strikeouts and no walks over 3 innings. And about the only thing I do care about as far as spring training stats, I certainly don't care about ERA, batting average, things like that. I like to see for pitchers, I like to see a good strikeout to walk ratio, also for hitters as well. And then some good exit velocities. And you want to hear, like, is the pitcher's stuff good? How is the stuff going? And for the batters, it's, exit velocities and things like that. And so far, so good for Davy Garcia. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think there is a chance we see Davy Garcia in the rotation this year. I know Spencer was somewhat skeptical of that. Him and Jack were somewhat skeptical, thinking that it might be a little soon to hope for that for him, that he might be more likely to be in the bullpen this year if he is pitching at the big league level. But I have hopes. I think that there's a possibility there. The Brewers have been known to work wonders, especially with a guy who most recently was with the White Sox. Yes, I know he came up with the Yankees, but
yeah, very Tobias Myers-y, that story, if it were to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, and if you want to point to, like, Tobias Myers was with all these good organizations too. He was with Cleveland, he was with Tampa as well. They all thought well of him and saw something in him. So it is possible to get more out of a guy than even smart teams sometimes. Sometimes it does happen. So there's reason to hope on that. But the real guy that I want to talk about here, and the guy that I feel really good about, I think of anybody that isn't likely to start the season, I almost certainly isn't going to start the season in the Brewers rotation, finishing the season in the Brewers rotation, Logan Henderson. I was telling Spencer, you guys saw it in the chat today. I'm like, okay, fine. You've won me over. I'm sold. I believe.
Fastball's ticking up. Yeah.
Fastball is ticking up this spring. He has one, just like Davy Garcia. He is putting up he had 5 strikeouts, no walks in 3 innings this spring. He has been really good, and I'm ready to buy in and believe in Logan Henderson as a starter. And I think if somebody is going to step forward and become a reliable starter from that group, I like him and I like Garcia to do that.
Paul, any thoughts on the rotation depth? How do you feel about it?
I wish they had one more guy, but um, I I actually have just listening to the guys too, kind of sold on Logan Henderson too. But they'll probably also just get a couple starts out of their middle relief. But I feel like there's not as much sort of on the existing roster that's going to jump up and like start to steal a bunch of starts. Like I feel like there's usually somebody in the middle that can maybe jump in. Like sometimes it's retreads. Like yeah, I'm blanking on old pitchers, but um, uh, I like just looking at the Pacoda projections for games started. I wish there was one more guy projected with like 20 starts, but it's very, I feel like unbrewersy to have a couple of a little more there with like tens on it. And I kind of agree with that too. So, I'm actually kind of hoping that Logan Henderson can do that, because otherwise I think we'll get weird starts from guys who shouldn't be starting. And I would like to avoid that if possible. Jared Koenig type starts are not my favorite. So,
yeah. Tyler Alexander's of the world, that kind of
thing. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he probably will too. That's the other
he's
thing.
projected for 3 starts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we could see him. Chad Patrick has also had a fairly good spring so far, nondescript. Connor Thomas pitched and has been pitching fairly well. That'll be interesting to see, because obviously the Brewers have to keep him on the big league roster to keep him as a Rule 5. I think there's a good chance that they do that to maintain their depth. They, I think, like him. And I read an interview with him where he was talking about the difference it is coming from St. Louis. And he started to kind of say something where it was going to be like, oh yeah, it's way better here. Like they actually know how to work with pitchers and like that sort of thing. And then he backpedaled and did the whole, I have to give credit to St. Louis for giving me the chance. He didn't want to rag on them, but you could read between the lines and sort of hear it that like he is now with an organization that he actually believes in. And he sounds like a very Brewers pitcher from the perspective of he's thoughtful. He's very into a lot of different pitches and a lot of different ways that he's sort of attacking hitters. And he has a very cerebral approach. He was talking about, what he needs to be able to do on the inside versus the outside of the plate. It was a very enlightening interview. Clearly, a guy who could have a future as a pitching coach sort of guy. So I like Thomas, but I don't know that the stuff is actually good enough that you would go, oh yeah, that's a guy that you want to be starting for you. But I think he probably is going to do that. We'll see, what they can get out of him.
Yeah, he's a guy who wasn't able to crack out a AAA for whatever reason for the Cardinals, for all the issues that they've had with their pitching, stuck at AAA for 4 years. So probably welcoming the change of scenery for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's move to the bullpen. So, of course, when we did the pitching preview last year, it was right on the heels of the news that Devin Williams is going to miss a significant part of the season with his back injury. So it was kind of a deflated start from the beginning there in that preview. And we started that one talking about who could possibly replace him. Now we're going to do the same thing this year after he was traded to the Yankees. So, obviously it seems like Trevor McGill is presumably getting the first shot as the go-to guy in the 9th. Paul, how confident are we that he's going to be able to hang on to that role all year? And if he falters, who do you think is next in line?
I'm pretty so the Brewers, you can never be too confident, but once you do get established, then they do defer to the haters and the Devin Williams of the world. And the one thing that Trevor McGill has going for him is that he is not a smoke and mirrors closer or reliever. He throws absolute elite gas, and when you do that, you have a very good chance of holding on to the closer's role as long as you stay healthy. Relievers are prone to fits of losing it and getting hurt, like all pitchers are, and so it's really always kind of a sucker bet whenever somebody's not an established closer to bet on them. But his stuff is pretty phenomenal. And so I don't think anybody's going to beat him out just by out pitching him. And that being the case, I think he hangs on to it all year. I think that is his to lose. And when you throw as hard as he does, it's going to be hard for him to actually lose it. So I think this is a rare situation where I think that he's kind of quite a bit better than a lot of what's behind him. At least that's going to start out at the major league level.
Well, I think the other thing is he doesn't necessarily have to be better than other guys to keep the role either. Like, if he's good, somewhere between fine and good even, I think he could hold on to the role, and that if somebody comes up and is a monster, like, say, well, a Craig Yoho, a Jacob Mizorowski, anyone, Abner Uribe comes back from, all of his shenanigans last year. Nick Mears, any one of these guys could step up and become better than him, I think. In fact, I think in some cases I almost expect it. Even Joel Payamps, but I think they could still just keep him there because, like Paul said, he throws gas. I think he's probably going to be fine, at least, in terms of being a closer. I think he's going to be fine. And I think there's something to the idea that the Brewers have had experience with having to promote guys into the closer role and then all of a sudden having to play by their rules and their whims and their demands. And I think the Brewers would be perfectly happy if, let's say Jacob Mizorowski does come up and is an absolute flamethrower, shutdown, multi-inning reliever. I think they would be perfectly happy to leave him in the 6th and 7th innings as a setup man and use him the way they used Josh Hader in 2017 and 2018 before their hand was forced in 2019 and he had to be a closer, and the rest is sort of history from there.
Yeah.
I think they would be perfectly fine with that. So I think that, if McGill gives them a good enough performance to be a credible, cromulent closer, I think that's fine. And then they'll happily put better relievers in front of him to set him up and to play more leverage with them and to play more matchup with them and to set all of that up and just, let Trevor McGill keep the 9th, and that's fine. So, but it also could just, McGill doesn't have a perfect injury history, and there is at least some blow up potential there. He seems to run into some home runs sometimes, and you don't like that from your relief aces. Home runs can be a real problem in the bullpen like that when you're holding tight leads. So you don't like that. So I could see it going another direction, but I just mentioned a bunch of other guys. Any one of those guys, if McGill was unavailable, I could see any one of them stepping into that role.
Yeah, if Yoho and Mizorowski end up on the team later, which I think we all kind of assume will happen at some point, if there is a power vacuum there, if McGill has blown up or gotten hurt, that's a natural place to step in. But again, I don't think they promote those guys into that spot. I think that for all the reasons that you said and more, let them go a little bit more low leverage just to get used to playing in the big leagues and have, the pseudo closer up at the top. The Jeremy Jeffress situation is perfectly fine to have as long as you don't do it in the playoffs in clutch situations. But since the second half of the question, if I had to bet on somebody else, assuming a decent chunk, I think right now, not excluding Yoho and Miz, who aren't up yet, probably Mears, and only because he seems like a good pitching lab candidate with a full off season to turn a lot of good peripherals into better production. They seem to really like him. They seem to put him out there in situations where maybe they shouldn't have more than they should have last year. And I think if they get him straightened out in a couple of ways, that he could be an extremely effective late inning guy too.
Yeah, speaking of home run issues, though, right?
Yeah, at that.
those do crop up for him. But yeah, I could see, even Joel Payamps, who at this point everybody's going to go.
Even I'm going to do that. We've seen a lot of Joel Payamps. We kind of know what he is. He's good. He's a good pitcher, but he's only a good pitcher.
And it could be the sort of situation where it's that's the guy that the manager says, okay, I trust you to go out and not beat yourself in the 9th inning. That you might get beat by batters, but I'm trusting you not to get beat by yourself if it does come to that. So I could see a scenario, especially early on, where Joel Payamps could end up getting some saves and closing some games. But I still think there's a really good chance that Abner Uribe just becomes the fire-breathing monster that we were all expecting, that it looked like he was becoming, even at the beginning of last season, like where it at the very beginning where it was like, oh yeah, Abner Uribe, he seems to maybe be the closer for this team now, like in the absence of Devin Williams. And then, yeah, it all went terribly wrong. But I think Uribe is a shot. Oh, I'm stepping on a question, aren't I? Sorry, James.
It's all good. Speaking of Abner Uribe, Tricky Henderson's asking, and as you noted, Abner Uribe was one thing for about 3 days in 2024, and then something completely different for the rest of the season. Have we forsaken him for his volatility? I mean, who wouldn't want to fight Jose Siri? And the hacky sack, who cares? And in other words, if we trade spiked value McGill in July, do you see Uribe closing the door again? What are your Uribe thoughts? I think he's nasty in every way you want a reliever to be. Paul, what's your reaction to that?
He is, but you actually do. So closers have this reputation for partially major league, partially people with fun theme songs who have been on this team, for being sort of weirdos. But you don't actually want that. You want the kind of weirdo you want is somebody who's unperturbed by the situation that they're in.
Yeah.
And Abner Uribe is very perturbed by the situations he finds himself in.
Highly
Frequently.
perturbable.
Yes,
Highly
extremely
perturbed.
perturbable. So yeah, like the nasty thing, kind of, you want that, but the way you want that is sort of confident nastiness, not I'm blowing up at everything nastiness. So I don't like him currently for high leverage situations unless he matures a little bit. He has obviously amazing stuff, but this is a problem, and this is not a one-off problem. It seems to be a fairly consistent problem. So when Abner's got to get himself straight, they should use him in controlled lower leverage for a while, to the extent they use him at all up top, to see if they can get him right. Like, you don't need to do physical development here. You need to get his head in a better space.
Yeah, I think that's all fair, and this is contingent on him figuring some of that stuff out, but the stuff is just so damn good. I mean, last year, it was so good last year, and he was throwing like 97, 98, and he's capable of going, when he was right, when he didn't have the injury issue hanging over his head, he's capable of going 102, 103. I mean,
Right.
It's
And a
such,
sinker at 103.
yeah, it's a 103, and it's like a bowling ball out there. Like, it is, yeah, it's just... It's such crazy good stuff. So I remain intrigued by him. But yes, he has got to get his perturb ratio down, or whatever. Like, it just, you can't have that, because that won't work.
The, I guess, instigation to perturbed ratio, is that the same thing as a K to walk ratio? I don't know. We'll workshop on that. That's fine. So outside of Uribe, there's about a dozen guys in the bullpen picture whose PECOTA 50th percentile projections have them being at least league average or better. So again, bullpen is looking like one of the deepest parts of the team. Paul, if you had to pick one of the spaghetti guys to be this year's, say, Jared Koenig, who comes out of nowhere to be a breakout bullpen piece, does anybody kind of catch your eye looking at the projections?
I feel like not really that isn't already touted, and we've already talked about that. Here's the thing: they have so many guys who throw like 100 or have awesome stuff, that underdogs are kind of hard to come by a little bit. I do kind of still like Carlos F. Rodriguez, mostly because I like saying his middle initial to distinguish him from all the other Carlos Rodriguez's. And I think he might be a good sort of long-inning glue guy, who ends up pitching way more than people think. But in terms of like the potential closer blow people away list, it's a very long list, and we've already talked about everybody on it.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the trio of big, tough lefties that are interesting to me. I guess Ashby isn't huge. He's shorter, isn't he?
Yeah.
Ashby's not big.
I think he's shorter.
Yeah.
Well, he's not Brian Hudson, and he's not Grant Wolfram.
Well, and he's not Koenig, who's like 6'5" himself, right? Like, yeah. But I don't know if you guys caught the Brian Hudson when he made his first appearance. The fastball's back, guys.
Oh, is it? I did not see that.
Yeah, the fastball's back.
I meant to see that too. Dang it. Okay.
Yeah. So the fastball's back, and if the fastball stays back, Brian Hudson is a monster again. So, yeah, fingers crossed on that. But like, remember how great he was and how he was looking like one of the best relievers in baseball last year?
For 2 months. Yep.
And that, well, it was, it was
a month and a half. Yeah.
I think it was even longer. It was more like through June, I think, like the first 3 months. And then after that, it started to go haywire. And then, yeah, he was gone shortly after that.
You're right. We were trying to get him to the All-Star game.
Yeah.
And then in Bryce Terang because it was never going to happen again. Anyway.
Yeah. So Hudson is extremely intriguing. I think I was very impressed. Rosiak wrote about Koenig, and I think it was Rosiak, either him or Kurt. And they were talking about him being the Swiss Army knife of the staff. I think it's a very apt descriptor for Koenig because he did so many different things for them. He could soak multiple innings at a time. He could pitch in high leverage. He could be a lefty guy who was brought in to get lefties. They even used him as an opener a few times when teams went heavy on lefties in their first three batters. There was just a lot of different uses for him. And his stuff ticked up a lot last year. That was not a out of no. Well, the stuff ticked up out of nowhere, but like as long as the stuff is back, and I haven't checked on that, but as long as he's still throwing with that added velocity that he did last year, there's no reason to think he can't be real good again as well. So add in Ashby to that group, and it's a very lefty heavy bullpen. Like that's a lot of lefties. But it's a lot of lefties who can like clown fools and like rack up a bunch of Ks too. Like they're out there to miss bats. So I'm very intrigued by that group, and I think that they could be also all of them kind of capable of going multiple innings. So maybe they don't want to do that after last year's unpleasantness with Hudson, but like. I think all of them are capable of going multiple innings if given proper rest afterwards too. So very curious to see those guys in addition to all the other things we've talked about. They just have so many relievers. It is an embarrassment of riches. And I think that your average baseball fan doesn't necessarily know that outside of Milwaukee. Like they're just like, well, they lost Devin Williams, so how good could their bullpen really be? And it's like, well, it's it's probably
still pretty good,
the best in baseball, because they have not only do they have 8 guys who are all good, but they've got like another 5 or 6 that are either good or project to maybe be quite good beyond that. So it's just so many guys.
Before we get to the other Patreon questions this week, I just want to talk a little bit more about Craig Yoho and Jacob Mizorowski. You guys obviously brought them up already. We're hoping, anticipating, whatever word you want to use, that they'll be part of the mix somehow this year. But, I think I'm really excited about Craig Yoho in that bastardized airbender, whatever he's throwing, whatever we're going to call it. And specifically him, but also Miz and just the multi-inning factor. But, Paul, when Jonathan was on the other week, he was talking about Pacoda and the projections for those two specifically, expressed some concern that, when you have high strikeout numbers in the minors, it may not necessarily translate to the majors if you are not exactly in the zone all the time. And I think those guys are kind of indicative of that. So insofar as you have some concerns about those guys, are you worried at all about their ability to still put up those big strikeout numbers at the major league level?
I'm not worried about them missing bats, but I am worried about them walking a zillion people. So yes, I think that Mizorowski in particular, that's a big concern. Like you still need to develop command. And honestly, like the harder, I feel like I have no research on this. Sometimes I feel like the harder you throw, the more likely it is that you're going to have control problems. It kind of makes sense. Like usually when you go for extra power, you do sacrifice some command, and the best of the best are good at both, and that's why it's so rare. But yeah, that is a concern. And if they were elite at command, they probably would have been up already. So we've already seen. I have not seen a ton of spring training games yet because they're not on TV enough. But I've seen at least Mizorowski struggle with command a couple of times. So yeah, it's still a worry.
Yeah, as James pointed out in our group chat, Miz was around the zone in that game. He was just missing, but that is a thing that big leaguers are going to pick up on. Like if they're going to make you throw some strikes, if a guy if he comes in with a reputation of not throwing strikes and like Miz does, and pitchers or batters are going to make him throw some strikes before they start expanding the zone and start really swinging at stuff on the edge, because they're smart enough to know they're probably not going to hit it. So they're going to make him prove that he can throw strikes first. And yeah, Yoho, it is concerning, as Jonathan pointed out. Like, we're talking about a guy whose fastball is in the low 90s. This is not Devin Williams and his, good 95.
97. Yeah.
Yeah, able to kind of 95, 96, able to kind of dot the corners with it. This is, much more 92, 91 in terms of a fastball. So he's going to have to show that he can not only that he can put it in the zone, but that it's not going to get hit. That he can set batters up with that to be able to let the airbender or whatever we're calling it, to see if that will play. So there's something to be proven with both of those guys, but they're undeniably exciting. And we should point out that, like, Pacoda does have Yoho is the best reliever in terms of run prevention in the entire unit, almost 20% better than league average in terms of run prevention.
Not so high on Miz for the reasons we talked about, because he has walked a bunch of guys in the minors. And yeah, that outing, the only one that I've seen from him so far this spring was the Cleveland outing, where I think he started that game. And you could tell the difference between him facing a minor league guy and having to face Jose Ramirez and Carlos Santana back to back in his first inning. I think even on Ramirez, he might have been ahead 0-1 or 0-2 and ended up walking him. Pitches half an inch off, but MVP like Jose Ramirez, not going to be fooled by that stuff. So we'll see how that goes. I wouldn't be surprised if either of them start the year in AAA and maybe even take a month or two before we see them. All right. Other Patreon questions this week. This one comes from Crew Salad asking, do you see any opportunities this year for the Brewers to explore piggybacking starters for a few innings apiece, like Ashby and Hall or something like that? Ryan, you're shaking your head. Why not?
Well, so it's difficult to do in this day and age with the way rosters are constructed and all of that, because if you're going to do that on like a consistent basis, you're going to need to take up 2 roster spots to do that. And that's going to mean taking up 2 roster spots on guys that are pitching like every 6 days, maybe 7, considering how often, the Brewers are going to want to run, like a 6 day or 5 days rest rotation, not necessarily a 6-man, depending on what the off day situation is. But I think they're going to more often than not want to have guys pitching on 5 days rather than 4 days rest. That just makes it difficult because from a roster spot perspective, I could see it coming into play at certain times where they say, okay, we're willing to do this today. But there's also the issue of when a guy finishes their start, the team is they're going to have to survey the land at that point and decide, well, are we down? Are we up? What are we going to do? Do we really want to bring this guy in to try to get 3-4 more innings out of him? Or do we want to just run with our bullpen to try to protect, maybe like a 2-run lead or something? So it's just a little bit difficult to work with that. It's something that you could do much more easily in the minor leagues when winning isn't your number one concern, and also when the rosters are a little bit more flexible. It's much harder to do at the big league level, and just not something that really plays in this day and age. It's something that should have honestly happened more in an earlier era than it did, but it never really took off.
All right, Brian Bolakowski asking our favorite question this week, I think. You just woke up with superpowers to create an elite pitcher with 4 pitches from the current Brewers staff. Whose pitches do you choose? Paul, I know you were in the same boat I was, where it was like, this was a lot easier a couple of years ago when you could choose Corbin's cutter and the airbender.
Adrian Hauser's sinker.
Adrian Hauser's sinker, I think,
totally
was a really good one. I think The Athletic had a similar piece where they at least asked all the Brewers pitchers, whose pitch do you wish you could steal and you can't choose your own? And Hauser's sinker, I think, actually won that poll, which was crazy to see. But Paul, I guess anything jump out to you on the current staff you want to bring up?
Give me Meyer's true changeup for sure. I will go to bat with that all day. I actually think one of the reasons this is a hard question is it's actually pretty tricky to take a fastball. There's a lot of
Mm.
good competition for it, and I don't know who's the best necessarily. um, I guess I want that change up, and then I don't think Mizorowski just because of the command issues. Although it's super fast, I guess Abner's fastball. Give you that.
Be a
Yeah.
good one.
I didn't even have that one at the top of my head. I didn't even think of that. But
Yeah.
Abner's
So-
fastball, if it's playing the way it normally does, that I think is quite obviously a pick.
You got to go with that, right? And then filling it out, I think actually gets pretty tricky. That's where I'm not really sure what my other two are. I don't think I really need any more. Just I can have like a Ben Sheets of just those two. That's fine.
There you go.
So some ones that I came across, McGill's four-seamer, he throws 72% of the time, and he really like lays on that, and it doesn't generate like a huge amount of whiffs from like like a whiff perspective, but he just throws it a lot, and he's really batters hit 209, 217, 279 against it. So it's a pretty good pitch and something he could just kind of rely on. Brian Hudson's four-seamer was something. Again, these aren't big whiff pitches. That was only an 18% whiff pitch. So those, I think you're right. I hadn't thought of the Abner thing, but that one stood out. We were talking to Spencer a little bit about this in the group chat, and I asked him, so which do you actually prefer, Ashby's curve or slider? Because both were extremely effective last year. And he threw them, he throws the curve a little bit more, but both were extremely effective. And he kind of demurred on that and was like, well, I'm not even, he wasn't even necessarily sure which one he preferred more in terms of those. Both were really, really effective. I'm just getting the numbers on those here. I had that up. Yeah, the curveball, batters hit 168, 229, 171 against. The slider, batters hit 144, 292, 210 against. I guess the hard hit percent was much better on the slider. So that one maybe is these are all relatively small samples though. But yeah, Spencer wasn't even sure on that. I think I want Ashby's one of those two. I'm just not sure which one. Maybe ask him which one. Maybe I can get a 2-for-1 deal on that. They're both breaking pitches, so they're all like curveballs and sliders exist on a spectrum, right? Like there's
Yeah.
So, also wanted to shout out Woodruff's changeup, which in 2023 098, 164, 118, and a 35% whiff rate. So Woodruff has a hell of a changeup too. Not sure how much of that is. Changeups are always a little bit weird because you're not sure how much of it is the pitch or how much it's playing off of the other pitches, like and taking advantage of being deceptive off the fastball or whatever. So those are kind of interesting ones. But looking at Piamps' slider, really pretty good as well. 176, 209, 306. So that was another one that kind of stood out to me from among the pitches out there.
Yeah.
How about Elvis's sinker? That's nasty when it's on too. I remember seeing a spring training photo, Sal Frelick holding up a shard of a bat saying, you want to see how nasty Elvis is? It's that sinker when it's on, when he can locate it, really good.
Yeah, that's a bowling ball pitch. I like that one. That's a good one. Yeah, because if he can locate it, that one is that'll clown some guys.
Also, Jared Koenig's fastball last year was incredible, and I can't figure out if it's specifically the sinker or the cutter. He threw lots of fastballs, and they all graded out pretty well last year, from what I remember too, in terms of stuff plus. So that one, I think, still surprises me just how much that pitch has advanced since he's joined the Brewers. But his success last year was legit because of that. So I want to throw an honorary mention there for that one as well. All right. Now that we named every reliever's best pitch, let's talk about Connor Thomas, who Ryan, you brought up. Michael Powers asking, the last few pitchers taken by the Brewers in the Rule 5 have not been ready for the big leagues, but have stuck around or come back to the majors afterwards. Can Connor Thomas be anything beyond mop-up duty, then return to the Cardinals? So, Ryan, you talked about how much you like him, Paul. Do you have any Connor Thomas thoughts beyond him just being a Rule 5 guy that they have to keep around for a minute?
No, I don't. I have nothing to offer on Connor. Like, I don't. I haven't looked at him at all, and it's nice. I don't know. Stealing from the Cardinals is fine, but stealing from this Cardinals is not as fine. So, um, if he ends up being something great, but he. We talked about so many other pitchers just now, other than him. So,
Sure.
I'm not excited, but who knows?
Yeah, I think there is maybe an opportunity, though, for him to start the season in the rotation as the fifth starter because, the injury to DL Hall, the fact that Woodruff almost certainly isn't going to be ready to start the season. I think there is some wiggle room at the back end for him to maybe get a start or two and to see what he can do, right? Like, give him a chance to see if you want to keep him around a little bit longer. I don't know who that would mean. I suppose you could still probably keep Hudson, Koenig, and Ashby. I think that it would still be possible to keep all three of those guys as well as him if he's the fifth starter. I don't think you could have him. You couldn't send him to the bullpen. You're not going to carry four lefties. That there's no way. So
Nope.
I think his path to the roster is to show that he can do enough to be a reasonable fifth starter to open the season and then go from there.
Cyber Cleric next, asking about the spring training pitch challenge system, which I've enjoyed, but Max Scherzer didn't.
Shocking.
Cyber Cleric asking, Max Scherzer wasn't happy about the ABS after getting a challenge wrong. A report on JT Realmuto was that he got all his challenges right, even some he said he thought to challenge but didn't, and he would have won those also. Do teams try to have the catcher take the lead on challenges? If so, does a catcher's pitch framing die off and a new metric on catcher's accuracy challenging balls and strikes becomes a thing? Oh man, I don't know if you saw the Max Scherzer quote, but it was basically like, we're all humans, what's wrong with humans? Typical old man thing.
Yeah,
I loved it. But Paul, I guess if this sticks around, how do you see that catcher skill evolving?
So teams will probably very quickly have an idea of who's good at this and who's bad at this. And if this is early in small sample size, but if it's catchers, then they probably will. And I think that's probably a good idea most of the time. This is one of those things I think with no evidence, but I think catchers are often cooler about how the calls are going than pitchers are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you want the rational person making those calls. Catchers, I also think, do have a better view of this, frankly. Like pitchers are, they're getting hit. Catchers are being hit in the mitt with the ball. Pitchers are doing a lot of stuff. Like they're really exerting themselves. They are not always in the best position to observe the ball crossing the plate. They know where they think it's going. When I throw a ball or hit a tennis ball or anything like that, I have an idea where I think it's going, but that doesn't mean it's going where I think it's going. And so, yeah, I'll bet that a lot of teams do designate the catcher or something, the most rational, most accurate person to do this kind of thing. And I do suspect that behind the scenes we'll get stats on who's good at it and who's not good at it. So that will probably pop up. I don't know if it'll replace framing, but something probably will. So yeah, I also just found it interesting to watch how like strikes were being called based on like a pixel of interaction between
Yes.
which is ridiculous.
The Brewers had one go against Caleb Durbin had one go against him. Ryan and I both put that screenshot up. It was literally like 1 pixel of pink that hit the zone, but it hit the zone.
That does bother to me. That is like having war to the 100th digit. Like that is attempting to lie to you via full precision, and I don't like that. I don't know a better way. I don't know how to fix it, but that is garbage. So.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a way to fix it, though I do think maybe rounding off the corners a little bit would make sense because that's the way it's traditionally been called anyway. And I think those pitches are real hard for hitters to hit anyways. So maybe sand down the corners of the strike zone a little bit. You could ask the machine to do that for you. It would be fine.
Add some feathering or whatever graphic design thing you want to put on there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note too, ABS does not use the front of the plate as the strike zone, as human umpires did. It uses the center of the plate.
Does
Others have noted this that have been following this longer. Some might think that's dumb. Why change the rule? That was Max Scherzer's beef. His pitch crossed the strike zone at the front of the plate, but was out of the strike zone by the middle of the plate. But I guess this is what's been tested the best out of all the minor league training and all that stuff. So that's the way it is. And that's an important thing to remember if this sticks around. It's not the front of the plate anymore.
Well, Max Scherzer is a guy who has very high levels of confidence in his own opinions and isn't going to be one to do a lot of self-reflection, I don't think, about like, well, is that really true or is that not? I don't get a feeling that Max Scherzer is that kind of a thinker. So
he was a dick about the pitch clock too.
Like,
he just doesn't like change.
Yes, he just very much does not like change.
Yeah,
By the way, I did want to add here because in the minor leagues, this is what's happening. Teams are telling their catchers to call it. They're not allowing pitchers to do it. I don't think it's across the board that they're not allowing pitchers because technically pitchers are allowed to challenge. But I've heard, I don't know where I heard this, but there have been teams who are saying, no, the catcher is going to be the one making those decisions, not the pitchers. So, yeah. I don't know if pitchers can, like, if they're whining and complaining about something, the catcher is going to go, okay, fine. Well, I'll challenge it
Tap
for
the
you.
helmet. Yeah. We just lost one.
I would imagine that would be how that would go, but I don't know for sure. So, yeah, this is already becoming the province of catchers, from what I understand in the minor leagues.
Yeah, and it makes sense for the center of the plate thing as well. I thought it was weird that some major league teams, some managers are just telling their guys don't bother with this because it's not happening in the regular season at all this year. So we'll just figure it out next year. I think that's kind of weird and silly, but I guess to each their own. I think Cleveland was one.
Yeah. It was Cincinnati because Tito was the one saying
Tito was like, yeah, screw it. We're not having this. So what's the point?
Yeah. What did Meg call it? She said that's a little, I can't remember the word she used, but it was like, it seemed a little weird and not in a good way.
I mean, the entire point is to like test this out to see if you want to do it. Yeah. So why not take the opportunity? That seems dumb to me. I don't know.
Agreed.
All right. Morgoth 10, our last question this week. For the Brewers pitching staff, who do you think is the guy most likely to heat up his tuna melt in the team microwave? That's a real dick thing to do. So I guess who's the least conscious of their surroundings and others, Paul? Who do you think?
Oh, this is a tough one. We've lost a lot of personality, I feel like. Yeah. I guess this is just going to be a slur for no reason, but I'm going to go with Aaron Savale. Not because he's a jerk, because I have no idea what he is, but because nobody will notice him doing it because he's Aaron Savale. It'll just be like, what the hell?
Smell it afterwards.
Tuna got put in the microwave by somebody who's may or may not be on the team. So that's probably it.
Ryan, any picks?
Yeah, I have no idea. This is like a Tricky Henderson question, though. I would have assumed that that's who this was if you didn't tell me who it was.
It's Morgoth.
It's Morgoth this week. This week, the role of Tricky being played by Morgoth. So,
it's definitely Devin Williams in the past. And definitely Josh Hader before that. So
you could see Corbin Burns doing
sure.
It too.
Yeah, Corbin totally on board with that too.
Yeah.
So what if the wrong person ticked off Abner Uribe? Would he heat up some tuna just to get back at the person?
I'd like to see Abner Uribe react to somebody heating up tuna in the microwave.
Oh, yeah. No, that's not good either.
Somebody'd probably get thrown at in the locker room.
Oh man, I don't know. I don't even know about pitching staff, but maybe Murph would do it just to screw with everybody else too. I don't know. That's a good question though, Morgoth. I appreciate that. More of that, please. I should note that there were some Patreon questions submitted this week that we didn't put into this show because they dealt more with the hitting side. So we will save those for next week when we do the hitting preview. Reminder also, patreon.com/MKE tailgate. Just $2 a month gets you that question priority perk. And Ryan will be putting up that hitting question call for questions next weekend. Sounds like in terms of recording, the offense preview. It's going to be another day or so. Just our schedule's not helping with the usual Sunday record schedule. So we'll plan on doing that the following Monday nights. So you can expect that episode that Tuesday. But in the meantime, thank you for listening, everybody. If you haven't already, please do go and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever else you listen to your podcasts, and please give us a great review while you're there. Until next time, enjoy this pitching preview. Hopefully, some of the guys that we mentioned here don't have their arms explode in the next week, because that would just be our luck. If that happens, we'll have to talk about that as well. But plan on the hitting preview next week. That'll do it for this one. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good week. We'll see you next time here on Milwaukee's Team.